You're listening to Stephanie and Fox, where we aim to educate, enlighten, and evolve your intimacy.
You can find us at stephanieandfox.com to learn more about counseling, self-study courses, and retreat services that we provide.
This show contains adult content about relationships, intimacy, and sex, and is meant for those 18 years and older.
Now please, sit back, listen up, and get ready to evolve your intimacy. Hey guys, it's Stephanie. Thank you for tuning in and hanging out with me for about an hour today. It's just me today. Fox is still out, but I am joined by, I should say, one of my very best friends, Danielle. She's been on the show before, and today we're going to talk about healthy sex. And what is healthy sex? All elements of it. I'm sure we'll dive into some kink. We're going to dive into, all kinds of stuff. But that's one of the most common questions I get as a therapist is my sex healthy? Am I doing things the right way, or am I normal? And I just feel like it's very important to kind of clear the air and talk about some of the abnormal things that we commonly get in therapy. And of course, Danielle is a therapist as well. And talk about, yes, your sex is healthy, and the weird things that we get asked. So Danielle, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me again, Stephanie.
You're the best. I know that I get to call you and I'm like, hey, come do a show with me. So you're just kind of like the sweetest thing ever. I love it.
Oh, I'm always happy to be on the show.
So I know for me as a clinician, I get asked some of the weirdest questions, and it's not weird to them. It's very honest, sincere questions, but it's weird to me because I'm like, well, that's so obvious. But of course, we have training that others don't. We have extensive training in sex therapy, sex, and more sex. I feel like that's all we talk about is sex. But now that, we're kind of in this world, it's so normalized to us. So talk to me about kind of what's one of the crazy things that people ask you about healthy sex?
I think probably if I'm trying to be as broad as possible, one of the things that I get asked all the time is this normal? Is this healthy? Is this okay? Is something wrong with me? And there's just this idea kind of in America that like anything that deviates from the sexual norm, whatever that is unhealthy or is weird. So people ask, and it's always funny to me, like what people think is unhealthy and weird, right? Because I can ask person A on the street and they'll give me one answer, and I can ask person B and I'll get a totally different answer. And we've talked a lot about like kind of living in the Bible Belt and sort of being right in that area. And it's funny to me that what some people consider like kinky or outside of the norm is totally different in the Bible Belt than if I were to ask somebody up in New York. So I get people all the time that are like, is this okay? I'm kind of into this. I want to do this with my partner. Does that make me weird? And the answer is probably, usually, no, that's normal. That's healthy. Like, as long as it's safe and it's consensual.
Absolutely.
And everybody's on board, it's fine and it's normal and it's healthy.
I like how you said consensual, because everybody has to be on board with whatever we're doing. I recently took on a new client that is a professional dominatrix. In her daytime, I know Danielle's got this. I wish you guys could see her face.
Yes. I love it. I'm getting so excited.
She's a professional dominatrix in her daytime job, but in her relationships, she's more submissive. And her big question was, am I normal? Because I dominate these men all day long, but when I'm with my partners, I don't want to deal with that. I want to be dominated. And one thing that I found is successful women, and I'm sure there's successful men out there. I'm not generalizing. I'm just speaking from my point of view because I am a female. Tend to have to make all of these big decisions in life with their businesses, with their homes, with their families. And that's one less decision they want to make in the bedroom. So I get a lot of women asking me, is it okay that I'm submissive in the bedroom? Does that make me less of a woman that I'm submissive? Or does that make me a weaker partner because I'm submissive in the bedroom? What are your thoughts on that?
So I get asked that question a lot too. And I think because I also do a lot of therapy from like a feminist lens. So I get a lot from women too, like, does this make me a bad feminist? Mm-hmm. That I want to be submissive or I want to be dominated. And it's just what turns you on. If that's what gets your motor going, if that's what you find erotic and sexy, it is fine and it is totally okay and it's normal. I would even say it's more like normative than we think it is. That I have heard that from so many people. I know you wouldn't be surprised, but I think listeners would be surprised how often we hear that. And the other thing is, like, going back to your client that is a professional dominatrix, how often have we heard from women who are professional dominatrix? And I'm specifically saying women because, like you, I have heard this from women clients who are dominatrix specifically, that a lot of the men that come to see them for those services are these high-powered CEO executives that make a lot of money or they run a business. And then they come to them and they're like, I want to be dominated. I want to be submissive. And we look at them and we're like, yeah, that's normal. Like, we can totally see how that's normal, right? So then why is it that when we flip it to being a woman who has to control a lot of the things in her life, who has to make a million decisions, who has to caretake everybody in a million ways, and then they want to get in the bedroom and they want to be submissive and they want to be dominated? Well, if we can look at these high-powered male executives and say that's normal, then we should be able to look at women and say that's normal too.
Mm-hmm. I love how you said the high-powered executives, because that was one thing that she was telling me, is that almost all of her clients are high-level executives in some sort of company, and they come to her because they don't get to be anything other than powerful at all times. Even in their houses with their wives and their families, they have to be the one in control, or they have to be the one making the decisions, and they come to her and she gets to do whatever she wants to them and they love it, thinking I'm in the wrong profession.
Absolutely. Right? Like, we went to school for like a million years to do this thing, but then we meet our clients that are professional dominatrix, and not that they don't go through a lot of education.
They do
and training.
a lot of training.
They very much do. And I don't want to discount that. But like, I hear that and I'm like, that kind of sounds like fun. Like, I might like to do that.
Yes.
And so some of us, like, on the other side of the table, like, to any dominatrix that are listening, like, sometimes we get a little jealous and we're like, I would really love that.
Absolutely. Especially when she told me she gets $600 an hour. What?
Right.
To spank somebody? Sign me up. Sign me up.
Like, you don't know this, but I'm a really good spanker, ladies and gentlemen. So
I've got a good swing. I got this.
Right.
Oh man. So from the male perspective, for healthy sex, what are some of the things that you can think of that men have asked you if this is healthy? Ladies, are you ready to take your intimacy to the next level? Head over to our website to find out about relationship, intimacy, and sex counseling.
And gentlemen, are you needing a little bit more? Join us at stephanieandfox.com to learn tips on how to communicate with that special someone and ignite that flame.
Now, let's get back to the show.
Something that comes up really frequently is anal play.
Yes.
I think that comes up super, and I think that we've discussed like this coming up before. It's always funny to me that someone who is AFAB, assigned female at birth, or someone that was raised as female, don't generally see anal play as something weird or something deviating from the norm. Surely there are people out there that if you said, anal sex or anal play, like in the Bible Belt, there would be quite a few people that are like, oh, that's kinky. Mm-hmm. But I think for the most general people in America would say that anal sex on the spectrum of like out there or kinky isn't that out there. And very seldomly do I have somebody that's AFAB that comes to me and says, I like anal play, is that normal? But super frequently do I have cis heterosexual men come to me and say, hey, I kind of like to have my ass eaten. Hey, I kind of like it when my girlfriend like fingers my ass while I'm getting a blowjob. am I gay? Does that make me gay? Is that normal? Is that okay? Is something wrong with me? Why? Why is it abnormal if you're a cishet man, but if you're anybody else, like, it's totally normal and it's okay? It's just a butthole, you guys. It's just a butthole. It doesn't have a sexual orientation. It doesn't know who's touching and licking it. It is literally just a butthole that has nerve endings and stuff all around it. So if you think it feels good, then by all means, good sir, play on.
I love that. And it is such a sensual experience because there are so many nerve endings and it does feel good. And so I love it when guys are like, my girlfriend or my partner kind of accidentally hit my butthole and it felt really good. And I'm sitting there thinking, first off, it wasn't accidental. She did that shit on purpose. And I'm glad you liked it, because welcome to the world of a whole new experience of sex that you haven't even opened up yet. I actually got into a very heated discussion with some friends of ours that were over at our house a couple of nights ago, or about a week ago, about straight men can have anal sex and still be straight. And we all know I'm in the Bible Belt. I'm in East or Central Texas, and they could not wrap their heads around that. And they were like, no. And I love how you said there's no sexual orientation. And I wish I would have remembered that. But, a few glasses of wine and I just get mouthy. But I wish I would have remembered to have said, your ass doesn't have a sexual orientation. If it wants to be touched, touch it.
Yep, absolutely. And the other thing is, why is it that people that have vulvas, right? If I'm a cis woman, if I want to engage with somebody else that has a vulva, someone that's AFAB, that's normal. That's okay. That doesn't make me a lesbian. That doesn't make me gay. I am queer. Let's just fully out there. The spectrum of the humans that I'm attracted to is very large. But nobody thinks that a woman engaging with a woman for playing around, or you and I have discussed that we heard this, in college or something, people would be like, oh, that's just a phase. All women go through that phase, Why is it that we can be okay with that with AFAB people, to the point that we even say things like, that's a normal phase? But then when we're talking about AMAB people, assigned male at birth, if they play around with or mess around with another male, or they, experiment in some way, or one kinky night, you get together with your girlfriend and invite another man into the bedroom. Why does that suddenly have to completely change your entire sexual identity? But for women, we look at it and we're like, oh, that's totally normal.
It's a great question. And there are so many men who are in alternative relationships, or, if you're having just a basic threesome and, it's a male, female, more than likely your dicks are going to touch, especially if you're doing some double penetration or something to that effect. And if your dicks touch, are you automatically gay? I mean, it's that mindset that, no, you were pleasing a woman and your dicks touched. Oops. But there are some guys that are so adamant to say, oh, no, nope, you're automatically bisexual. And it's that limited mindset that just blows my mind.
Right. And the other thing is, when people say things like that, I'm like, somebody please tell me what is so magical about a penis. What? If your fingers touch, you don't automatically have your sexual orientation change. If your hips kind of bump up against each other when you're having that threesome, nobody says your sexual orientation changes. But for some reason, there's something that we just feel like is so magical about a penis, that because if two vulvas touch,
it's
we're
hot.
not like, oh, you must be a lesbian. But if two penises brush up against each other, we're like, nope, that completely changes all of who you are. Y'all, the penis is not that magical. It doesn't have that much power.
I agree, except if I did wake up with one, I would probably like that little elephant, his little nose, when he's, the baby elephant, and you see the video and he's spinning his, that's exactly what I would do if I were to wake up with a penis, because,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just need to know what that feels like. But that's
right.
it. That's the only magical thing I want to do, is twirl that bitch around. But You're right. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no magical powers to it. It's not that special, but there's so much associated and connected to that organ.
Right. I discuss that a lot when I talk about like the concept of virginity, which is a completely social construct that is like completely made up. And we've kind of had discussions about this
Yes.
before, growing up like heavily in purity culture stuff. This idea that like and this is sort of a tenet of purity culture, if a man has sex, and I'm going to speak in male female binary here because that's all that exists in this culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if a man has sex outside of marriage, it's almost seen as like it was a mistake, it was a fumble, it was a moral kind of weak moment for you, but like it doesn't irrevocably change you. It doesn't completely change who you are as a person. But for whatever reason, for women in those Christian cultures or in the purity culture in general, because we have an extended purity culture in America,
Mm-hmm.
there's this idea that if a penis goes inside the vagina, you are completely changed as a person. It will just totally change who you are. You no longer have value as a future wife, which, by the way, who says we want to be somebody's wife? But you no longer have value as a person. You've just completely lost something, and it totally changes who you are. Again, like a penis doesn't have that much power. It's not so magical that it completely changes who a woman is as a person. But in American culture, for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, we know the reasons,
Yeah.
because of purity culture and patriarchy and compulsory heterosexuality, we put this penis on this huge pedestal, like it can completely change who you are as a person. And it is literally just a body part. It's a genital, but it's no different a body part than your finger is. So what in the world makes it so magical that it can change a person?
I've had some fingers do things that penises couldn't do.
Amen. And tongues as well,
Ooh.
ladies and gentlemen. So
Yes, ma'am. Now you're getting me all hot and bothered over here.
right.
So I kind of speaking upon the purity culture, and kind of a lot of people, especially in our areas, because we are in the South, you're in Florida, I'm in Texas, we have a lot of people who come in and they think, well, because I am, a Christian, or because I am in this, I don't know, just because I am who I am, I can only have sex in the missionary position, and anything else is not right. It's unhealthy, or it's deviant, or it's just gross. And when did that start? Did I miss that in grade school? Was there a chapter in our purity book that said that missionary sex is the only sex that we can have and be like saintly, godly, and correct? I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts?
So the missionary position, like the question of when did it start? So that's actually really interesting, or I find it really interesting.
I love it.
So, right. And hey, y'all, I am not against the missionary position. I'm just against being a one-trick pony.
Yeah, I need some variety.
That's it. I need variety and a little spice in my life. So the missionary position started way, 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 way back in the day. And it's sort of this idea, it definitely started in religion, hence the missionary position.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of debatable, like, historically, sort of when did it start and who started it or whatever. But in general, it's this idea that is the only holy way to have sex, is like missionary, man on top, maybe woman on top. But it started when we started sending white missionaries out to different areas of the world, namely to like Africa, to convert people to Christianity. And they saw people from different cultures that were engaging in sex that they thought was deviant in some way. And so here again, we have this definition of deviant sexuality that existed at that time, that today we would look at that and be like, sounds like a normal Tuesday,
Right.
So the idea of what healthy sexuality, one of the biggest things that I always tell my clients is, the idea of what is healthy sexuality changes depending on where you are in the world and also when you are in the world. So if we're looking like way, way back in the day when these missionaries were going to Africa and India, different places in the Middle East, to convert people to Christianity, for example, they saw African tribes that were having sex doggy style, that would have sex in public in front of people because it was a tribal community. And so monogamy didn't exist in some places. And again, we're talking about tribal communities. Every tribe had a different way of doing things, different customs, different traditions. But maybe they wouldn't be monogamous. Maybe they would have sex like right outside their home in front of the other tribe members, and that was totally normal and nobody thought anything of it. Maybe they would breastfeed other people's children. Nobody thought anything of it. But they saw them engaging in these sex acts that they didn't think were holy, that they didn't think were okay. So then they sort of spread this idea that sex is only okay within monogamous heterosexual marriage and missionary position. And so then that's kind of where we get the missionary position from, is these missionaries went to different places in the world and started telling people the way that you're having sex is deviant and it's against God and it's wrong. And this is the way that you need to have good, godly sex.
Good, godly sex. That's an oxymoron if I've ever heard one. But
right.
And I'm not knocking Christianity. We all know that I am a Christian, or may not all know that, but I'm a Christian. I get it. I was raised in the purity culture. I struggle and I have all of these battles. I'm very open about it. But I also, like you, need a little spice. I need to be manhandled, flipped over, and just taken, and I'm good. You know, that whole missionary thing. But it's just so shocking that even today in 2021, I still have young clients coming in, young women, and actually some young men who are like, well, what other positions are there? Where have you been? Do you not turn on any TV show and see 1,000 positions and 1,000 different ways? I mean, any TV show nowadays. I'm kind of embarrassed watching some with my daughter, and I'm like, oh, well, you know, it's just, yeah, just watch it. You'll learn something. But in the beginning, I have that, oh, God, she can't see this. But why can't she see this? I mean, I'm not watching porn with her. Let's just clear that up. But if it's like a steamy sex scene in a movie, you know, I still have that fear, and that fear is based off of what I was taught, that if you did that as a child or as a teenager, that you were worthless. So that is so, assigning your worth to your sexuality and your worth to your sexual practices is something that's deadly, detrimental, and so popular even today.
Absolutely. I just engaged in a discussion last week, and like you were saying at the beginning of this, we have, as sex therapists, you get so much education on sexuality, and you take so many classes, and there's Stephanie and I have both done at least one where now I can't think of the a SAR. Thank you.
The SAR, yes.
Attitude assessment. And we essentially sit in a room and watch massive amounts of porn and get exposed to massive amounts of fetishes and kinks and all that. And the purpose is so that way you don't kind of have an ick response or be like, oh, that's weird, when someone comes to you. And so to a certain extent, when you get all this exposure and all this education, and Stephanie, I don't know if this happens to you, but you forget what is sort of common knowledge and what is known and what you know because of your extensive education. And sometimes it still shocks the shit out of me. I engaged in, I was teaching a class last week on the idea that virginity is the social construct, that virginity isn't real, it doesn't exist, there's no real definition of it. And there was a early 20s girl in class, and she was like, well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think virginity exists. It's just that we can't measure it in a man in the same way that we can a woman. And I said, tell me what you mean by that. I'm not sure I understand. And she said, well, for a woman, if you have a hymen, you're a virgin. And if you don't, you don't. You're not a virgin. And men don't have that. And Stephanie, my mind was like blown, because I was like, do we still believe that a hymen equals virginity? Like, I know that these people exist out there, right? Like, you and I both grew up in a heavy, heavy purity culture. So to some extent, you are aware, But like, I'm still blown away sometimes when people are like, oh no, if a woman has a hymen, that's how you can tell she's a virgin. And the hymen has absolutely nothing to do with virginity.
Yeah.
So it's still, to this day, we still have women out there that are being taught, AFAB people that are being taught that if you have a hymen, that's what determines your virginity. And there are still AFAB people across the world that are being murdered because they fail virginity tests, and that are being shunned by their families or killed by their newly married husbands because they don't bleed the first time they have sex, which most AFAB people don't bleed the first time they have sex. There's still women out there that are pricking their fingers and spreading it on the bed sheets because otherwise it's this huge shame. So absolutely, we still definitively have people, even here in the United States, that believe that hymen equals virginity. And we still do virginity testing here in the US. That's still legal in the United States, to take your child to the doctor and get a virginity test.
But sex is not penetration. And I know you know this, but sex is not just penetration. Sex is anything that turns you on, that gets your motor revved, that just makes you feel good. Some people love, and this is completely healthy, and this is another question. I got this recently. I have a client who has a foot fetish, and he was like, I just feel like I'm so abnormal, and I'm not gonna lie, I legitimately thought about this, and I'm so glad that my mouth shut up, because sometimes I don't, and I wanted to be like, so what are my feet like? But I didn't. I stopped myself. But I legitimately was like, oh no, don't you do that, Stephanie, that's just wrong. But
normal thought, though.
It is a normal thought, because I needed to know that my feet were sexy for some ungodly reason, because I needed to feel validated about my feet, because he said he had a foot fetish. But foot fetishes are normal. And if you get off, if you have some sort of sexual gratification, that's a word, right? Gratification? Okay, because that just didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. Some sexual gratification from feet, well, that's an erogenous zone for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be your breast, your genitals. It can be anything. And people get so caught up in the fact that, oh my gosh, well, that's not healthy. That's not normal. Fuck healthy, fuck normal. Does it turn you on? Does it make you happy? Do you have a consenting partner? And are you having fun? Because so many times we forget that pleasure is how we need to measure things, not necessarily the orgasm. Which leads me into my next thing, is women who come to us, and again, we're on the women train, but here we are, that come to us and they think that there's something wrong with them because they don't orgasm. And I have a couple right now that when I tell you they were in my office literally screaming, like I had to have them leave. It was so bad. Because she cannot orgasm and he thinks he's failing her. And it's just this huge explosion. And so he keeps saying there's something wrong with her. She's broken, pretty much. And she's like, well, he's made me think there's something wrong with me. And an orgasm is not the measure. It's not. And so that's another myth, quote, I guess, that we need to debunk about healthy sex, is just you don't have to have an orgasm to have healthy sex.
Right. And I think that that's something that we focus so much on. I have heard multiple, and I'm just thinking through my head right now of how this goes. I'm going to use the terms man and woman here because I truly only see it with heterosexual male-female couplings. I don't see this when I have lesbian clients, or when I have non-binary clients, or when I have queer clients that are in non-heterosexual relationships. I don't see this. But when I have a male and a female in a heterosexual relationship, a lot of times I'll have the woman be like, he's always asking me, did you come?
Yes.
Did you come? Did you come? Like, as soon as sex is over, it's like, but did you come? Stop it. I understand wanting to make sure you're pleasing your partner. And I think a lot of times it comes from a good spot, right? It comes from I want to make sure you were taken care of. But first of all, a lot of times when the woman says, no, I didn't, the man's response isn't, how can I get you there? It's usually like, oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
And the other side of it is, that's not how we're trying to measure a healthy, happy sexual encounter. And I say sexual encounter because of what you just said. Sex is whatever you define it as. If the two of you get in bed and you touch each other and you just mutually masturbate, or you rub each other's genitals and it's pleasurable, that's sex. Y'all just had sex. That's which is why we can't define virginity, right? Because sex is not completely defined by penis and the vagina. But the other thing is, like, your partner might have had a really good time. Your partner might have really enjoyed that encounter. Your partner might have gotten a ton of pleasure from that encounter, but they may not have orgasmed for a multitude of different reasons. Maybe they're really stressed. Maybe they actually did have a lot on their mind. Maybe they didn't get enough sleep last night. Maybe your female partner is about to be on her period next week and things just aren't flowing hormonally and shit down there. It might not be you, it might be you. And if it's you, you got to sit back and have a communication about that. But that's not how we should be measuring a happy, healthy sexual encounter. And I'm going to give an example really quick, because I worked with a couple recently that wanted to start going to kink dungeons. They wanted to experience this, and they're both kinky. They were both really into it. And neither one of them necessarily wanted to engage with anybody else in the kink dungeon, maybe down the road, right? But just as a couple, this is something that they found erotic, that they wanted to dip their toe in the water and experience together. And the man in the relationship was like, so they went and they did it, right? They went to a kink dungeon. They had a great time. They didn't engage with anybody else, but they met some cool people. They were exposed to some things, and they had a fantastic time. And he ended up going down on her in public, but that was all that happened between the two of them. Nothing else sexual happened in the kink dungeon. They went back to their hotel room that night and had a great time together. But he comes in and he says, I had a great time. It was fantastic. They both agree that they want to do it again. But then he says, I was very nervous and I thought going down on her was really sexy and really hot, but I'm scared that in the future I won't be able to get an erection. I was very anxious. There were people watching, which again, I did find really attractive, but usually when I go down on her, I have a raging hard on by the time it's done. Like, I am ready to go. And I was just so nervous about it. And so when we go back, if it ever came to engaging with somebody else, you know, another person in the dungeon, or it came to her wanting to do more things, I'm scared that I won't be able to fulfill that need. And I think it's a little bit of performance anxiety. And I said, I absolutely agree with you, but can you tell me, like, can you go more in depth? And he's like, well, what if I can't get a hard on? What if I can't ejaculate? And I said, why are you putting that? Of course, this is performance anxiety, because you're worried you're not going to be able to perform. But why is getting a erection and why is ejaculating your definition of performance? Why is it that when you go down on your partner and she's getting pleasure, we don't call that performance? We don't call that success. And not only that, but when your partner goes down on you, if you don't have an erection yet, and they give you a blowjob to the point of getting you an erection, right? That still feels good, doesn't it? And he was like, oh yeah, of course, absolutely. So that's pleasure. So then why do you have to have an erection? Or maybe you really like it when your partner eats your ass. Why can't that be successful? Why can't that be part of why are we measuring performance based purely on the fact whether or not you get an erection, whether or not you ejaculate? And he was like, holy shit, you're right. I didn't even realize I was doing that. And so it's that, like, I feel like a lot of times, particularly males in cis-het relationships, will put so much pressure on themselves that I have to have this raging hard on and I have to ejaculate, otherwise it's not successful. Well, we're measuring it, like you said, we're measuring it based off the wrong thing. We should be measuring it based off the fact that you guys enjoyed yourself.
That brings up another interesting fact, and another common thing is women who are not lubricating or not self-lubricating, and they have to use lube, and they think, oh, my shit's broken because I have to use some lube. Oh my goodness. And he's all like, well, why can't I get you wet? I just need y'all to understand, if you are a vulva owner, that thing, that organ is a bitch. She's got a mind of her own. And I don't even know what the hell she's thinking half the time. So it could be something we ate. It could be something we drank. It could be anything. And it just doesn't work. Now, and that's non-concordance because I'm turned on. I'm ready to go. And maybe she's not lubricated, but that doesn't mean she's not ready to go. Squirt some lube on that thing and let's go. And people are so... they're so stumped when you have to use lube, and they think that they're so unsuccessful, and they think that there's something wrong with them because we have to use lube. And that is a myth that I just think needs to be kicked out real quick and in a hurry.
Absolutely. So you nailed it as you were talking, like sexual non-concordance. Sexual non-concordance is absolutely a thing. As we get older, it tends to happen more frequently just because of hormones and body changes and things like that. But essentially, sexual non-concordance is my genitals are not matching how I feel in my body. So maybe you feel really turned on. Maybe you're in a really erotic space with your partner, but you don't have a raging boner, or you're not super soaking wet. That's just your body not responding in concordance with the way that you're feeling. And particularly for vulva owners, there can be a whole lot of hormonal things that happen that can throw that stuff off. So when you're about to get your period, there's massive hormone fluctuations the week before you get your period. That's what initiates a period. And so we're having, and I don't want to get too much into the hormones, it's not a science, talk, but those massive fluctuations in hormones, that can change how wet you get or whether or not you get wet, or directly after your period, right? That can change how wet you get, whether or not you get wet. Your stress level, if you're super stressed, all these things. And flip it to the other side, people that have penises. I had a woman come to me one time that was really struggling. She was in a new relationship with a man, so it was a heterosexual relationship. And she was really struggling with feeling attractive enough, and she didn't think he was attracted to her. So we bring him into the session, and they've only been dating for like 3 months. And she's like, most of the time when I've been with men in the past, we start kissing and they have a raging hard on. Like, we're just making out and they've got a boner and a half. And for this guy, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of touching. It takes a lot of, blowjobs or whatever. And so we brought him in, and I presented this idea of sexual non-concordance. And I also presented this idea of, responsive versus spontaneous desire. And he was like, yes, that's absolutely me. I have responsive desire. I have always been like this. My whole life, I need to have something to respond to. I need to have stimulation to respond to. And then he was also in his mid-40s, and he was like, sometimes I'm super turned on, but the equipment just isn't quite with me yet, and it takes a little bit longer. That is all so completely normal, right? And that happens, but then we get so up in our heads of like, well, a penis is supposed to respond this way, and a vulva is supposed to respond. There's no supposed to here, ladies and gentlemen. There's no ladies and gentlemen. There's no supposed to here, right? Like, it just, your genitals just are what they are. And if you're not getting wet, squirt some lube on that shit and get it going.
Let's go.
And if you're not getting hard, stimulate the penis a little bit more. And if it still doesn't work out, that's what dildos are for.
Strap it on.
Strap it on, man.
Another of my favorites that you just brought up was, I just had a brain. It just flew out my ears. Hold on. I'm going to pause.
Stephanie and I also both have ADHD.
Yeah, we do. I don't know what I was about to say.
Sometimes that happens.
We were talking about lube. We were talking about hard-ons. Damn it.
Penis is not working the way we want them to.
Penis is not working the way we want them to. I don't know. It'll come to me again. It was so good. So good. And it just flew out my ears.
Well, speaking of ADHD, like, this is a good topic sometimes for us to touch on too. I have a lot of clients that have ADHD as well. And sometimes people with ADHD can feel a lot of shame about the fact that they can't always pay attention during sex. Like,
yes.
right? Like you'll be sitting there having sex and then your partner's like, what are you thinking about? And you know that the answer isn't the grocery list. Like, that's not what you should say because it'll make your partner feel bad. But that's what you're thinking about. And that's so totally normative for people with ADHD. Like, I'll have clients that are like, I should be able to focus during the entire. Why? You can't focus 90% of the time in other areas of your life. What makes you think sex is this absolutely magical thing where your brain will have one track and you'll be fully engaged and on it all the time? Like, the important thing is, like you said, that you're experiencing pleasure. And if your mind wanders, just bring it on back. Just bring it on back. But you shouldn't have to feel shame or guilt over the fact that your mind has wandered off and gone somewhere else. ADHD is a neurodivergency, which means our brains work a little bit differently, which means your brain might wander a little bit when you're having sex.
Absolutely. And I that happens to me a lot. And one thing that I have to do to bring myself back to the moment is I think about the touch. I think about pressure points, or, I'm thinking, okay, so how does this feel in this moment? And that usually brings me back into the moment and away from the grocery list or whatever else, the dog's barking, or a plethora of things, that squirrel I just thought I saw. I mean, I can get distracted so easily. And it's not that I'm not interested. It's not that I don't want it. It's the fact that, well, my brain just went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You ever been like foreplaying, like, and I hate the term foreplay, but I'm gonna use it here. You ever been doing like foreplay with your partner and like y'all are being sexy and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, did you remember that blah, 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 blah? And then your partner's like, what in the hell? And you're like, I'm sorry, it just pops into my head right now. Just sorry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Just keep going. I'm sorry. I'll pause.
Yeah, forget I said it.
Put a pin in that. Just hold on. Can we pause? I need to make a note of this so I don't forget later. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I might have done that. So
it's a normal thing.
Kink. Let's kind of move into some of the kink talk and what's normal and healthy. Because people who are kinky think that they're just not normal, not healthy. They think that they're just too far out there, and they don't necessarily want to talk about their kinks and their preferences and their little turn-ons or little oddities that make them really get it off. But I know that you were looking up some kink facts because you are my person that I go to for all the facts, all the data. And so let's talk about how we can normalize healthy kink.
So I think the first way that we can normalize it, and again, like, what's healthy kink? Healthy kink is anything that you find erotic and arousing and is consensual. And at the very beginning of this, we said safe, consensual, and you both like it, you both get enjoyment out of it. And when we say safe, that doesn't mean that there's no risk involved. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that there's nothing, right? Because some people have a choking kink. Some people like being sat on and stuff, right? So there are differing ways to engage in kink that have some risk to it, but is there safety planning? Is there a way for you to back out of the encounter if it's too much, if it starts to feel dangerous to you? Do you and your partner discuss these things beforehand? So, if you have a choking kink, you don't just go straight into having some person that you don't know just start choking you with no boundaries, no discussion, no nothing ahead of time, right? Like, you discuss how much you like to be choked, how hard you like to be choked. And this is how I'm going to communicate to you that you need to let up on the pressure and stuff, right? Like, so there are ways of engaging in some risky stuff that are safer than other ways. And so healthy kink is anything that you're into, as long as it's consensual and you guys have a safety plan around it, it's fine. And inevitably we'll always have someone come up and be like, oh, well, so having a kink surrounding children cannot consent to sexual activity. So let's just get that out of the way right now. Like, children can't consent to sexual activity. That's obviously not what we're talking about. So there are obviously some things that are outside the realm of okay, but in general, any kink that you have a consenting partner and you guys can do it safely is fine. But what we see in clinical settings, I'm sure you've had this happen to you too, is clients will come to us and they will disclose their kink to their therapist, and the therapist is convinced that this is a deviant sexual behavior, it's unhealthy, and they say like, well, we need to work on eliminating this for you. Specifically, dominating relationships, dom and sub relationships. A lot of therapists see that as abusive. Oh, that's abuse. You need to leave that person. That's abusive. Most frequently, we see that if there's a heterosexual couple and it's the male that's dominant and it's the female that's submissive. So first of all, that's a bias that the therapist has all on its own, because it's almost like therapists think that LGBTQ sex, well, that's just kind of kinky and dirty all on its own. But when a heterosexual person engages in it, ooh, that's weird. So that's your heteronormative bias coming out, for one thing. And the other thing is, just because there's domination going on, if everything is consensual and there's been this communication ahead of time, that's healthy sex. Both partners are enjoying the dynamic of this dom-sub relationship. Both partners are getting something from this. That's not unhealthy. There's nothing wrong with this. But what the research finds is that a lot of therapists work to eliminate kink from somebody's relationship or somebody's dynamic. And then the other thing that we found is a lot of times therapists will relate kink to trauma. Oh, well, you're into that kink because you've been traumatized. Maybe, like, who knows, right? Maybe they are, but also maybe not. There's a lot of people out there that are into kink that have no sexual trauma whatsoever. And there's a lot of people that have sexual trauma that aren't into kinky stuff at all. Correlation doesn't equal causation. And the research supports this, that there's no causation between trauma and kink. And so we have to stop relating people's trauma to everything that they do in life. And therapists need to develop a more open kind of belief system that we can't always find a cause for things. Because kink is a normal part of the healthy sexuality spectrum, that also means that it's not always related to somebody's trauma or their childhood upbringing. So I think there needs to be a lot of education done for clinicians to start with, that we need to stop pathologizing this stuff in our clients.
And I agree with that 100%. And then I want to also bring up age play. Just because you participate in age play does not mean that you're a pedophile. Does not mean that you are going to go out and do dirty things to children. If you prefer your woman or your man to dress up younger and you're playing that teenage fantasy, that is normal. That is healthy. And we talk a lot about sexual imprints. Well, when you started your sexual journey, your sexual debut, you were probably 12, 13, 14, right? When you first got that first, ooh, hey, And who were you attracted to? You were attracted to other 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old people. So that sexual imprint kind of sticks around, and you some people don't ever lose that. And they're like, wow, I really like that look. It's not about the person. It's not about the technical age. It's about, that's what I like. That's what I like the look of. And so I want my partner to dress that. And there are so many people that are so concerned that they are pedophiles because they like age play. And as long as everybody's consensual and you're not touching any child that cannot consent and you're keeping it within your safety zones with your partner, that's healthy.
And there are definitely, like what people will say is, that could be a sign of pedophilia. Yeah, it could be, sure, definitely. Like, I've worked with sex offenders in the past. In the very beginning of my career, I did sex offender treatment work. And is that a thing? Sure, it's a thing. But there's also a lot of men out there that engage in role play and things like that never ever touch children, that have no actual sexual attraction to children. And there's a lot of people out there, and I'm going to say men because most sex offenders are men. There's a lot of men out there that are pedophiles and are interested in children, and they don't engage in any kind of role play or anything like that. So again, correlation doesn't equal causation. And the other thing that we find is that a lot of times the dynamic that play there, and again, not always, but a lot of times the dynamic that is eroticized, that people find sexy, is really the power and control dynamic, right? It's really this like, oh, this is this vulnerable person and I have power over them. That's where a lot of this teacher fantasy comes from, teacher-student fantasy. I mean, a lot of times that's about somebody that has power over you, or somebody that can kind of play with those dynamics. Rape fantasies. Like, I know that this is a really taboo topic, but some people have consensual non-consent that they act out, that they role play in the bedroom. A lot of times that's very much about the power dynamic and not feeling sexy. There's no relationship. Research hasn't found any relationship between wanting to role play consensual non-consent and actually going out there and sexually assaulting a woman. And there's, depending on what study you look at, anywhere between 30% to 80% of women have been, or AFAB people have been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed in their lifetime. Like, it's not all these people that have rape fantasies out there doing it. It is normal, heterosexual men. I don't want to like pigeonhole it to be heterosexual, but generally it is, that are engaging in sexual assault. So these things don't make correlations, but I think that our human brains want to find reasons for things so much that we're like, oh, well, it must be the age play thing.
Yep.
Now, don't get me wrong, like, being someone that does a lot of research and a lot of work from a feminist lens, I definitely think that there's something wrong with the fetishization of young girls. I definitely think there's something wrong with this fetishization of virgins. And I think that goes along with like the patriarchy that we live in and this idea of controlling women and stuff. So it does cause me concern when there's this like over focus and over fetishization of what makes somebody young, i.e. purity culture, right? Purity culture is obsessed with women being naive about sexuality, like a child, women looking super, super young, like a child, women being virgins, like a child. That's how we start to fetishize that kind of stuff. And that's directly related to patriarchy and misogyny, which is patriarchy's law enforcement arm for controlling women. That's when it starts to become an issue. That's when it starts to have real harm to women. But if we're talking about two people engaging in a consensual non-consent fantasy where there is complete consent, and also, let's not forget, when we have two people engaging in a rape fantasy, there's usually a ton of communication going on the back end.
Lots of negotiations.
So much.
Yeah.
Negotiations, exactly. Intimate negotiations of, you can call me this and say this to me, but don't say this to me. You can do this, but don't do this. I'm going to be upstairs in bed and I'm going to pretend I'm sleeping. And I want you to come home from work and just start engaging in sex with me and like tie me down and stuff. That can be really erotic to people, but you're not just going into this without discussing it ahead of time. There's rules and boundaries that take place. And that's what makes it healthy. That's what makes it completely different than an actual sexual assault, than actually feeling like you want to assault a woman, right? Like, there are differences and nuances in this that I think that people who aren't involved in the kink community or don't understand kink, they don't understand that all of this negotiation and communication happens on the back end.
I think that as we begin to wrap up, that is the main thing that I really want to hit home to all of the listeners is your sex is healthy and it's normal if it is consensual, if it is negotiated, and if it's pleasurable. Orgasms, throw those out the window. You don't have to have an orgasm to have a pleasurable experience. You don't have to have a lubricated vagina, vulva, whatever you want to call it, to have a pleasurable experience. Throw some lube on that shit. You don't have to have a hard dick to have a pleasurable experience. You have fingers, you have a tongue, sit on the face, whatever you need to do. You can make sex fun, even if your tools that you were born with aren't working properly, or not even born with, the tools that you have now, if they're not working properly, that's okay. For whatever reason, you can still have safe, healthy, normal sex.
Agreed. Absolutely.
So Danielle, tell everybody where they can find you, because you're the best and I love you so much.
Thank you. My website is dkramercounseling.com, and on TikTok and Instagram, I am In Bed with Danielle.
Can I get in bed with Danielle?
I mean, you already do most of the time.
Oh, man.
If anybody wants to get in bed with Danielle, that's how you can find me on TikTok and Instagram.
Yes, and she is beautiful. She's absolutely stunning. So if you've not checked her out, check her out. Let's just not be silly about how gorgeous she is. Also, guys, check out our website on stephanieandfox.com. We have all the free resources on there. I do want to remind you that you are not in this journey alone. If you need some assistance, don't be afraid to reach out. There are people, even if we can't help you here at Stephanie and Fox, I know hundreds of people who can. Danielle, I have people in California. We have lots of sex therapists who can help you out and find the specialty that you're looking for. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I need help. And especially during this time when the world's falling to fuckery. Alrighty. Well, thank you again, Danielle. And thank you for listening, and we will see you soon. Good night. Thank you for listening to our show. And remember, you are not in this alone, and we are here to help.
You can check us out at stephanieandfox.com and subscribe to all of our social media accounts to get free resources about evolving your intimacy.
Have a good night.
Have a good one.